Well, today we're going to be talking about journeying through grief. And I think it's kind of important during the holiday season because I don't know about you, but sometimes you miss folks when, especially during the holidays. Though grief and loss are something we all experience during our lives, I believe that sometimes we don't know how to process these experiences. And those who may not be going through grief at this time don't always know how to relate to those who are going through grief. So today, I've asked my friend and ministry colleague. Galen Goben to come on up and join me. So Galen, come on up. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Praise God. Now, Galen ministered to us way back in March last year, and it's kind of his fault. He ministered the week before the pandemic started.
It's your fault, Galen.
I'm kidding.
Wow. Wouldn't be the first thing that I had been accused of.
And then he ministered for us. I'm going to scoot over a little bit. And then he ministered for us in November as well, and it was an awesome message called Going Forward, and I believe we're still going forward. But what you may not know is that he was a pastor for many years, and then, for the past 14 years, you've been the, so what's your official title?
My official title is Clergy Services and Grief Support Director for Forest Lawn.
Wow, that sounds awfully big. Wow.
Yeah, wow.
No, but I'm really blessed that we have folks like you, because some of us don't know how to deal with this. And for me, Galen, this is very personal, because I don't know, I think most of you know around here that last year I lost quite a few folks. This year we lost 3 of our family members, church Oasis family members. Mm-hmm. And then my brother passed away in October. And I thought it was just about grief. But then you and I were talking, and I realized it's not just about grief, it's about loss. Let me tell you what happened. I told you guys a little bit last week, but let me tell you more. Last Thursday, I needed to get my Mini Cooper fixed, my Mini Cooper. She's like 11 and a half years old, and she had some issues. So I call my mechanic, and he doesn't answer. And then Buster and I go down there, and we discovered he was gone. And I felt like it was another loss. Mm-hmm. And then my car is just so old, and I'm just so attached to her. And so when I told her goodbye, I almost shed a tear. And then I felt silly and I felt stupid because it's just a car, right? So what's that about? Why do we feel the loss of things like we feel the loss of people?
Well, first off, drop the word just.
Okay. Oops.
Okay. And I'll come back to this, I'm sure, off and on, because it is such an important part. But Jesus says to us, don't judge, because the judgment you use will be used against you. And that is a judgmental statement.
Wow.
It's just, we negate it. We say it's something not important to us. And somewhere we know and understand that it is important to us. Loss comes to us because we find someone or something important to us.
Okay.
And in that importance, when we lose that, then either through it wears out, or our person's body wears out and they die, that now we have grief. You find something important, you find something that is interesting, that you get, and the language we use is that you get attached to. And when you're attached to something and you lose it, the resulting experience is grief. So what we're talking about today, you can connect up to any kind of loss that you may have, be it, and some of those are good, and some of those are things that good in the sense that we choose them,
right? And
some of those are things that we would not choose to do, but the experience becomes the same for us. You and I talked a little bit about your house.
Yeah.
And your move. Did you want to say a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, even the house. We were in our house for like 23 years. And so I remember we were all done packing up, and Buster and I were there, and I almost cried in the driveway again. I'm like, wow. And then I literally talked to it like it was a real thing. I said, thank you. You served me well. And
bingo.
And I'm happy for the new person in it. But I think I mentioned to you that sometimes when I feel this real sense of grief or loneliness or something, I will do a mental memory check in my mind, and I'll close my eyes and I'll see me walk through every room.
Very good.
My dad passed away in 97, and I didn't want to forget what the house looked like. It was so precious. Mm-hmm. And so I will close my eyes and I'll see me walking on that old shag carpet and his old chair and the kitchen and the old washer and the different things. And it just brings me such peace and comfort. And And isn't that true that the memories just help us?
It is. Memory is the one of the primary ways that we manage our grief and that we process it. Memories are the things that connect us up to an immediate moment. You know, when you have a grief experience, and what I mean by that is, you know, you find it's a very, very normal kind of thing. You know, you're going through the grocery store. This is, I hear this a lot from women. They're going through the grocery store. Their husband has died. Their spouse has died. And everywhere they look are memories. You know, I would get this to make this favorite thing or whatever and all. And you get those tears, a grief burst. We call it grief burst. We feel really stupid. We're in the middle of the store, you know, and
It's not
and
stupid.
everything. It's not. It is the reaction to a deep loss that we're experiencing. And it's the moment that in that moment, that loss becomes real again. It is not a loss back there because of the way our minds work and the way that God has created us. That loss is immediate. We are experiencing that loss immediately now. And that's something we don't give ourselves credit for. That's something we don't think about with grief. Is that, well, you know, I lost that person 10 years ago. Why is it still here and stuff? Well, you know, grief just comes and goes and it has its own thing and we're not to try to figure out its ways, if you will. But so we have that immediate experience and it immediately brings that loss to us now. What the memory then does for us is to process that through and to go back through that again. Because the more we experience it, the more we remember it, you know, hopefully doesn't always happen, but hopefully the intensity and the frequency of the experiences that we have begin to kind of, you know, ratchet down a little bit and they begin to kind of come down. We don't have as many outbursts. They don't last as long. That intensity and frequency changes. But every time that we have that memory, we're working on it. And whatever it is, whether we are, you know, end up in a crying situation, or which is an easy one to think about, or just end up with the feelings, the sadness, or that sense of loss again, we're processing that a little bit more. So that's the way God has made us.
Okay.
It's the way God has made us. Our emotion centers in our brain, as well as our, our memory centers, are right next to each other.
Wow.
We're
Did
built
not know
that way.
Didn't even know that.
Yeah, we're built that way.
And it's not just women then.
No.
Thank you.
No, and everybody's a little different. They do it. We all do things a little bit different. And men and women in a real broad stroke of things, and I mean really, you know, broad stroke, kind of do things different, but we're all pretty much the same. And we have different elements and ways that we work our way through grief.
Well, can you expound more? When we were talking, you talked about the nature of grief. So can you expound on the nature of grief and where it comes from? Because we don't plan this. And I was telling you earlier that because of all the deaths that we've experienced, sometimes I felt like it really physically hurt to breathe. Yep. And that's the only way I could explain it. And I'm like, this feels worse than if I got stabbed in the arm or something. It's just the most painful thing sometimes.
Right.
So explain more about that.
Yeah. So again, anything that we're connected to that we lose, we have that grief experience. Love and grief are two sides of the same coin. You don't get one without the other. Just, you know, so, you know, that's part of what's difficult about grief. And it will impact us in so many different ways. We don't think about the physical experiences of grief. Most of us think about grief and we think about the emotions. Right? We think about, you know, the sadness, the loneliness, the regret, the anger, the fear and the anxiety. Those are kind of the five big major ones. And that's kind of where we stop with grief. But grief is an entire body, whole being experience. It's physical. People, you know, you have physical manifestations of it, such as having trouble breathing, feeling that pain. It literally is a pain in your body, in different spaces. You know, stomachs get tight. You know, our chest feels like it has, you know, bands or it is constricted and it's hard to breathe. Those are very physical things. Crying, I mean, that's an easy one, and we kind of give ourselves okay for that. Crying is a physical response to grief. But there's also, the emotions. There is social experiences to it. We have to interact different. Your congregation here, when those people died, or when they moved, if you had people who had to move for whatever reason to another place, and now connect in, digitally, and there's real neatness in that and things, but those people are not physically here, and that is a loss.
Right.
And we as a community and as a congregation around here have to kind of rebalance ourselves. It's one of the things that's really hard in a family when a person, an important family member dies. The whole family then has to rebalance itself and understand who they are as a grouping all over again.
Yeah.
Whoever that person is. And you have to it just takes a while. So families and communities and organizations grieve when things change, when someone is removed from it, by whatever version. Somebody moves on to a grand and glorious job that takes them across the United States that you're, very excited about and happy for them. We as a congregation have been praying for that. And this comes along, and now that's going to change us. And on some level, we get to grieve as a community, which is why the community, the communal things that we do, it would be really, really important. And we don't do it very well as organizations to learn to do the mourning ritual. Grief is the internal kind of definitions. Grief is the internal experience of a person who is, or an organism, to put it that way. A community is an organism, a church is an organism. Grief is the experience, the internal experience within that person, that organism. Mourning are the outward expressions of that.
Okay.
So a funeral is a mourning ritual. The casserole brigade that comes to the house,
even though the person's not hungry,
is a mourning ritual. It's something that we do, that we gather together and we do to support and strengthen that. Things that we used to do, and we still see this when, like, a president dies. The whole world, the whole nation kind of stops, and we're glued to our TVs to watch the rituals that go on, because we as a nation, that person has died now, and there's a whole set of things that we do. And we need to watch and participate in those things. That's a part of how we process this. And that's part of what's been so difficult during COVID, because we could not do that.
Yeah.
No, don't get together.
Yeah.
Stay apart. You got to keep your 6-foot distance and things. And what is it that is our natural response, especially among a community that loves one another,
you hug,
knows one another, and somebody is hurting, you go and you surround them.
Yeah.
And you hold them. And it's like,
Yeah.
And that has impacted us. There's, if somebody mentioned earlier, I think it was in the morning announcements when you talked about, the craziness that we're hearing. People are beating up others on airplanes and stuff like that. It's ridiculous. Why? Because we've got this internal bunch of stuff that we don't know what to do with, that frankly, we need to grieve.
Wow. And
we refuse to do it because we as a nation, we as human beings don't like to grieve. We don't want, what do we get taught about grieving? Get over it. What do you mean? You had the funeral. Aren't you beyond that now? No.
No, that's only step one.
No, it's the beginning part of it. We've been given, fortunately and unfortunately, we've been given this 5 stages of grief.
I was going to talk about that.
Yeah.
Yes,
you want to know? We want to talk about. It's like, and most everybody knows them. Even if you don't know them, we know them. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance.
And I read about 2 more now, which are, what were they? Shock and guilt.
Yeah, and so there's a whole bunch of different ways of kind of talking about grief and understanding grief. Unfortunately, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and had this, it did some research and things about people as they were dying and how they came to grips with their death.
Okay.
That's where the 5 stages come from. And there's some helpful stuff within it. But what happened was it got translated over to grief. And it was so powerful because it was the first time we were really talking about it, that the 5 stages get into everything. And you will hear about it in everything. And somebody's like, "Rah, rah, 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 rah." Well, they're in their anger stage. So give them a little while and they'll get through it and they'll be fine. No, not everybody does all the stuff and everything. And it's a whole different thing. Wow. One of the things that we want to understand is that grief is powerful, it is impactful, it is life transformative, has a lot of very similarities with it, but everybody does it different. No 2 grief experiences are the same. And so I would encourage you to kind of push the 5 stages away, because the thing it does for most of us is that it sets us up to feel like we're failing. Because grief is absolute chaos, especially when what we have lost is incredibly important to us, like a brother.
Yeah. And it's unexpected. It's my little brother. And, my mom just died a year ago, and then he dies a year ago later to the next day. The good coming out of it is I'm getting to know his wife, Teresa, better and stuff. But this was, I love my car and I'm grateful for things, don't get me wrong, but my honey was really excited the other day. He goes, "Oh, I'm so excited about your car." And out of my mouth, I said, I would trade my car in a heartbeat to have my brother again, because that's how I feel.
And that's another thing. Griefs get intertwined. They get, which is why when you have a whole lot of loss, which is what we have had for the last 21 months now.
Yep. Yeah.
Loss on top of loss on top of loss on top of loss. And you literally just get overwhelmed with it. And you just almost freeze.
Yeah.
It gets really, really hard. Grief becomes something that we need to intentionally work with. And normally, we do grief really, really well because it's so ingrained within us. We know how to love. We don't know how to, you can't set out when you're starting to love somebody or whatever. You just start building a relationship.
Right.
And it gets within you. Right? And you just do it and you live it every day and you discover new things and the relationship continues to grow and build and blossom. And soon we call it love. Right?
Right.
Well, you lose that love and we know how to process that generally well. Most of us, 85 to 90% of us do our grief, whatever it is about and everything, very, very well. Until you keep layering grief upon grief upon grief upon grief. And life becomes absolute chaos. But if you walk away here with one thing, considering we're in a church, and I can say this in a church, I don't normally do this in kind of different other types of venue. But the one thing in particular that I know about God is that God is about bringing order out of chaos. Read the Bible.
Yes.
That's what it is, front to back. It's bringing order out of chaos. And grief is the process we inherently know how to do, that God has given to us to bring order out of the chaos of loss. Wow. Trust God, trust your heart, because for the most part, you know how to do it. But when you get overwhelmed, when there's so much, we need to step back and find the support that we are looking for. And most of the time we find that in family and friends and church and other organizations that we're a part of, people that mean so much to us and everything, and we feel that support. However, everybody is so doggone grieved right now that they don't have any energy to give anything for anybody else. And we are just flat out overwhelmed.
So you're seeing this across the board
Oh,
in church settings all over and
across the board. Everybody. This is powerful and deep grief experience that we've been going through in general for the last 20 months. Because we had life, we knew what was going on, we knew who we were, we knew how to function, we got up every day, we did the things that we did, people went to school, they went to work, we knew what was going on, and then all of a sudden it was like, stop.
Yeah.
And don't do any of that. Okay, how do I pastor people when I can't go see them?
And what's your new normal? We're
or
still
what's
not there.
the new normal? We are
there.
still not there. And we stop. And we're not quite sure. And stuff. It's been maddening. And each time that we kind of take a step forward, we get 2 or 3 steps forward, we get to take one back, we get irritated. And the grief that we have that we want to just be done with, because that's what we're taught to do. Just be finished with it, get over it and things. There's no stages. We don't do this nice and clean and clear. We have to process it. We have to live every day. We have to mourn when we need to do that. We have to feel the experiences we have and not deny and negate them. And getting overwhelmed with the things that we are, we need to figure out how to talk about it.
Wow.
And we don't do that very well.
Well, what will you tell the people? Because, in Christendom especially, it's just so neat to have a blanket statement, just say, just give it to Jesus. Because for me, I did give it to Jesus, but I'm still walking it through. And I've discovered that for me, suddenly I was feeling depressed, and it took everything in me to do some things I enjoy. And so I literally made myself do something I did enjoy. Because I said, what would I tell myself? I'm also a certified nutrition coach, a life coach. What would I tell myself? Even if you're just sit outside for a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I deliberately went to the bike trail and I started walking, and suddenly the pain in my chest wasn't as much. Mm-hmm. Then I almost felt guilty for not feeling the pain in my chest because, wait, is this a substitute for Jesus? All those lies we tell ourselves. Can you address that, please?
Sure. Yeah. How much time do we have?
Oh, plenty. No. Go for it, please. Please.
Yeah.
Y'all are in on my counseling session.
So there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things about that. First off, in Christendom, which is where you started, we took we took Paul's beautiful statement about we do not grieve as those who have no hope.
Right.
And transformed that into we do not grieve.
It's not what he said, though.
No, it's not. We grieve because we don't grieve in the way that others do, which is this is gone over, done with, because we have a sense of eternity, of connection, of life, of being together again. Right. That is a hope that we have that is part and parcel of our faith. But I tell you, Jesus stood at the tomb of his friend and wept.
Yeah. Yes.
And we forget that the very next verse behind the shortest one that we all know, Jesus wept, is the crowd says, look how much he loved him.
Yes.
Jesus wept because Lazarus was deeply personal to him. It was a personal loss to him. It was a great loss, and he wept. We can weep as well. We can do our grief as well. God has given us the process of grief to heal us.
Thank you, Lord. There's healing on the other side, y'all.
And I don't mean, that the ultimate healing is, when we're all restored and back over in heaven and stuff like that. Grief is about processing the loss that we have and building and creating a new relationship with the person who has died. We have relationships with people that are physical because we can see them and hear them, talk to them, get texts and all those kinds of things. It's emotional. We have those emotional connects with them. We have a spiritual connection with people and our pets and other things that are important to us. Right. Your car had a name, didn't it?
Minnie.
Uh-huh.
And this new one is
It wasn't
Nightbird.
your car. It was
Minnie.
You have a relationship with that.
Sure did. washed her, took
Right.
care of her, gave her gas.
We have all those kinds of elements within our relationship. And when the person dies, and we'll talk about that because it's the easiest thing to think about, but when the person dies, what gets broken is the physical part of it because I can't see them anymore.
Yeah.
I can't hear their voice. What are we always afraid of? I'm going to forget their face. I'm going to forget the sound of their voice. We keep text messages.
I do that, yes.
We keep we will pay to keep their phone going so that we can call it and hear their voice.
Interesting you said that.
Really common kinds of stuff
Wow.
and things.
Yeah.
We don't want to forget. We want the physical part. The reality is that grief moves us through the process so that the power of the relationship is not based in a physicality anymore, but based in the wholeness of the relationship that we have and the place that they live with us.
So you believe they're still with us, and do you feel like sometimes you're doing something, you can almost feel their presence with you, and you say something, or you talk to
Absolutely.
them, or you can almost feel their counsel and their wisdom, like I hear my daddy's laugh. Really?
Absolutely.
Good. I'm not crazy, y'all.
So if you had to use you as an example, and that's why we're sitting
That's why we're here.
together. So to use you as an example, if you had a question that you needed to ask your brother about something, whatever, and you asked that question, do you hear his answer maybe in your head or in your heart? And what I mean by that is you just kind of know what he would say,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we want I need to ask so-and-so this question. And normally when they're alive, you pick up the phone and you do that. You call them, right? Now you sit there and you just go, okay, so what do I do about this? My dad, and I use this a lot as an example. My dad was my handyman. Okay. I did not get that gene.
Same here. My dad was too.
You know, and my dad could fix and mess with anything.
Yep.
It pissed me. My dad was my handyman, even though he lived in Texas and I lived out here. I would call him and say, Dad, I need to do this. He plumbed my washing machine from Texas. He drew me a schematic.
Oh,
he gave me
wow.
a parts list.
Wow.
He sent it to me, mailed it to me, because yes, he didn't do email. But he sent it to me and everything. I went to the hardware store. I'm standing there with this. I called him on my phone. Okay, Dad, this is what you got here and everything. So he gets this, and I mean, you know, all this stuff. All right. He plumbed my washing machine
Wow.
from Dallas, Texas, and things. My dad died in 2007.
Okay.
And I still don't do this stuff very well, but I like to try to do some of those things. And I will find myself trying to figure something out. And the other gene I didn't get is patience.
Oh.
So don't pray for that, because you
No.
get lots of
No, you get
opportunities to try.
I know.
And I'm working on something. I'm just, why isn't this working? Because in my head, it should have just gone right and things like that. I get really frustrated. And I find myself sitting back and saying, okay, Dad, how do I do that? Mm-hmm. And most of the time, I can figure it out. And these are pretty simple kinds of things and stuff. Because that relationship with my dad is not just physical. That relationship is much deeper than that. And our relationship with the people that we love is much deeper than that. We just have to learn to trust it in a different way. And we're not very good at that.
No, we're not.
You know, we believe very strongly in the physicalness of it. And it gets really hard after they die. And it's just about transforming a relationship, changing it, and relying on it in a new way. And that's really hard for us. But it's something we're used to doing because we grieve through the whole of our life and we work our way about it. I'm so grateful for this because the church in particular needs to talk about it.
We don't.
We don't. It is just wait, you'll see them again. But doggone it, it still hurts now. And so it's like, well, I can't let that show and everything, and I got to go to church. And I'm like, yeah. Do you find people, and I hear about this a lot, but do you find people who after they have a loss don't come for a while?
Of course.
Why? because it hurts. And I don't want to show what seems like a lack of faith, because we're taught in that whole tidal wave of faith that we get handed.
Yeah.
And we all know about that and everything, that, well, we don't grieve as those who have no hope, so therefore we don't grieve. Right. You're going to see him again, be joyful. They're with Jesus. Yeah, but they ain't here.
That's right.
And I'm not done with them.
Right.
Love is never done with,
right.
Never done with the object of its affection.
That's right.
Period. You'd still take your car back.
I still would.
You would still love to be able to wander through your dad's house again.
Yeah.
I'd love to be able to go home and, and we hear about those stories when the childhood home that gets sold and somebody goes up and knocks on the door and
yes.
the house has been sold 3 times. I grew up in this house. Do you mind if I come through and stuff? And what do? You walk through and this is my room. And right now, as I'm saying that, I'm walking through my house in Richardson.
There you go.
And there's my bedroom and my brother's. And I used to run down the hall and dodge people in the hallways and stuff like that, and hang around the corner and look out into the den where the TV was, while my parents watched the, Carol Burnett show.
Oh, yes.
And I wanted to watch that show and stuff like that. And somebody moved and I'd run back down the hall. I'm there. That's what memory does. And it makes me feel good now. When I sold the house, it hurt, but it makes me feel good now.
Yeah.
That's what memory does. That's how we grieve. That's how we make those moments real and precious again.
Wow. Well, I have some questions
Sure.
for you, if you don't mind. Here's one that said, is there a cutoff point for us to grieve? How long is too long? And can you get stuck in the grieving process?
Ooh, again, okay. So so how long is too long?
I'll actually give you the question.
Okay, well, that's fine. Okay. There is no cutoff point for us to grieve. When you love somebody and you lose them, you will grieve the rest of your life, because you always want them there at particular moments to share things with. I would love to. There are things I'd love to share with my dad still. In particular, and also I tell him, how long is too long? It's not. There isn't. Can you get stuck in your grieving process? Yes. And that's part of what we're all struggling with, because, again, the overwhelming nature of it. You get stuck when you don't feel that intensity of those experiences and the frequency of those experiencing slacking off. They should have a normal kind of decrease to them. And a normal grief, and I'm going to put that in quotes and things, normal grief is about 9 to 16 months. Okay, in on average and stuff, and we just process and move our way through it. The raw stuff is the first, 3 weeks, 3 months. Everybody's a little bit different. You got to get through the numb part of it and things like that. But again, every time you start talking time frames, people start going, okay, good. Let me get through this, and I'm going to check my box. No, it doesn't work that way. But on average, a year, little over, you're feeling okay and you're living normal life. If you get to a place where you can't do anything, or you get to a place where the intensity level and the frequency of what you're feeling is still incredibly powerful, and it's impacting your life such that it's hard to function, find somebody to talk to. Something's wrong. Something's and wrong only in the sense that you haven't been able to process it. Something got in the way. And a good counselor, a good therapist, somebody that knows about grief, who can ask the right questions and help you to find, because the answer that you're looking for is inside you. The counselor doesn't have any answers.
Right.
The answer is inside of you, but there's something that you just don't see. And so a good counselor can help you figure that out, because once you figure out what's blocking it, that gets out of the way, and it generally starts to move.
Well, we know someone. I know, I don't know, Wendy, for this one, why don't you come up and you can share it more properly than I would, instead of just writing it down. I don't want to get the details wrong on this particular one.
Well, I know a person that their child died 55 years ago. And the intensity, how you put it, has not abated.
Right.
And they've even said to me that I didn't get a chance to grieve when it happened.
Okay.
And so 55 years, even though I've told them, take the time now,
Absolutely.
they still, it affects everything.
Yep.
The day they found out their child died through a car accident.
Okay.
That's something you have to walk on tiptoes with. The day of the funeral, the service, you have to walk on tiptoes. Every memorial
Their
that comes
life functions around
Yeah.
the date and death of their child. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a real difficult one. So, any loss has grief. We don't like to compare grief because everybody's is different.
Right.
There are some that are more that just have a greater intensity and can lead someone to getting stuck. Yeah. The death of a child is one because that's outside the bounds of what's right. Children bury parents, not the other way around. However, we know that death is pretty doggone indiscriminate. And it comes and does whatever it's going to do with whomever, whenever it comes. So the death of a child and a sudden, violent, traumatic death, such as an automobile accident, such as an aneurysm that will pop and and somebody falls dead and nobody knows about it. Such as a COVID death where, like right now, I'm bringing this into where we're at right now because somebody gets COVID and what do we hear? How scared people were to take that to the hospital because they were not going to see them again, and they didn't. So COVID can take 3 or 4 months for people and all. It can take a few days, a few hours, but that 3 or 4 months is like, wait a minute. They were just here. In May, I was talking to them, and now here it is, July, and I'm not. Somebody else outside of that might go, well, it's 2 months. But the reality is it just feels immediate. So again, it's an internal kind of thing. Those kinds of death make things a little bit more difficult because they're called traumatic death. And when you have a trauma is different from a normal grief. Every trauma has grief, but not every grief is traumatic. It's one of the ways that we kind of keep that straight and talk about that. So that is a traumatic death and the death of a child. And that definitely, and if it's 50 years later, they need some counseling. And I would say also, that exactly what you said, Wendy, and you are so right in talking to them and saying, do it now. It's never too late. It's never too late to go back and to do the things that we need to do, to talk to people who have died and to make amends, either with them that we, something we feel like that we have left over, or to yell and scream at them to get that out and to ask and to have them, ask for forgiveness. That stuff can all be done. It's amazing what this human brain can do and what God does through the power of interaction with a good therapist who can support you in some really difficult kinds of stuff.
Sure. So I just thought of this. The ideal of her not being able to process it at that time,
That's another thing.
because she had to take care of her grandchildren.
Okay.
And so not having that is that
That's another
a
part of it.
catalyst that may have?
Yeah. With there is a whole bunch of factors that go into a person's grief that can make a difference on that. Okay, and type of death is one. That's what we talked about. Life circumstances. She had to step up, and she could not grieve for her child because she had to parent another set, and she had to put that off. If you have to move because it is the breadwinner, if you will, to put it that way, who has died and died unexpectedly, and you have to move. Now you've got other losses around that. We call those secondary losses, and contemporary losses. The contemporary life experience that we're in. What kind of personality we have? That plays a factor. There's some of us that, see the glass half empty. Some people see the glass as half full, and that will impact our grief experience, how we process things. So there's a whole lot of things that go on, but a good counselor, a good therapist who knows and understands grief can really help lead us through to kind of sort through this stuff and understand what's happened with us that we can process it.
Well, here's a good one that, How do you motivate yourself to get out of bed when all you want to do is stay in bed? Mm-hmm. Why do simple things like cooking, showering, brushing teeth feel like such a large, complicated task? And how do I protect my loved ones from the way that I respond to grief? I've become very sensitive, irritable, and pessimistic.
Okay. All right. Great. That's great. That is a great question. The motivation is hard because one of the big pieces that is a part of a grief experience as well is, why do I care?
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
I mean, if my child has died, why do I care about a shower? Yeah. What reason do I have? Because that everything else pales in importance to the fact that my person has died. They were my world. You ever said that about somebody who died, or heard somebody say that in a eulogy? I don't know how I'm going to go on. Helplessness is a real powerful emotion that we can have in our grief and loss. Early on, we can feel this way. Okay? It's not normal if it continues to go on. And again, I want to be really careful with the word normal. It's not something that most of us would do. We would have a day here and there where it's just like, and it's okay then, stay in your PJs. Call in sick if you got sick time or something like that. Give yourself the space and permission to do that as you need. But if it starts lasting, now we've got some issues because it will build on itself. One of the things that a grief will do for us is to make us question our spiritual understanding. When your child dies by an automobile accident or your child is born with cancer.
Right. Yeah.
What? And scripture says, that God has made you and things like that. What? Huh?
Or your child's disabled.
Or your child's disabled.
You have a disabled child, right?
I do. Yeah. It will mess with your theology. And one of the worst things that we can do as a church is to say, oh, God has a plan for this.
Oh, that gets so old.
Or you are so special to get such a special child. I want to slap people when they say that. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's real.
I say I want
we keep it real.
I have not so far. Okay.
Keep it real.
But because the reality is, and it's changed my theology. Mm-hmm. It really does. And a death will do that. And God adores that. Oh, thank you. Because it allows God to get out of the box that we have God in and say, oh, well, this is the way God works. Surprise. Well, surprise, maybe not. And God says, okay, good. I'm over here. Come talk with me. Come be with me. Let's hang together for a while because as we sang today, thank you, B, God is with us always. What wonderfulness is it that we have a God who will get down in the muck and the mire and the excrement.
Yes.
Paul uses that word in Scripture. Get into that stuff with us and come and sit with us and be with us in the midst of that. That is powerful. And God then can say, let's just talk. Let's just be together. That draws us in. And it destroys everything that we believe. And we have to understand something totally new. And God is like, I'm here with you in that. Let's walk together for this. One of the most beautiful things about grief and loss, life, let me back up. Sorry, I'm starting to preach here.
That's
Sorry.
okay.
Life is about learning to let go. And one of the things why we don't do grief very well is because grief means loss, and we as human beings are in control, right?
We think so.
Right?
We think so.
Death is the thing that says, God had death in the midst of life from the beginning. It is not a punishment for sin. I'm sorry.
No, we don't
I'm
believe
irritated with that. And I'm going to start preaching that stuff because it's not about what we did wrong that makes us die.
Correct. That's right.
We're mortal and we're going to die. And grief is about God walking with us saying, I'm here with you. And with every loss, I will fill it. Because ultimately, everything that we hold there is in between us and God, including our loved ones. As much as I love my wife and my children, there still is space that I need to learn to let go of them so that so that I can get closer to God and still love them. What was it? How do I protect my loved ones? You can't. And you shouldn't. You shouldn't protect your loved ones. Now, if it is like, and they say good morning and you go, that's a problem. Okay? So talk to somebody. See somebody. If you're concerned about that, see somebody. Find out what's going on because anger's a part of it and that's okay. But when anger gets directed out and it's only the thing that comes out and all, then it begins to impact and get in the way of our relationships. So if you need to see somebody, see somebody. That's really important. Ultimately, death and loss are about getting us back to the Garden of Eden where we and God walk in the cool of the day. One-to-one. Living life. Step by step.
Fellowship. Amen. No, I'm not sure, Bill, if I can read your writing on here. I think this is you. After grieving, after my parents passed away some years later, I may feel lonely and need company from friends. And I love weather when we have a... Well, you may want to... I don't understand. I'm sorry, sweetie.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. My writing, it's all good. Why don't you explain what you're trying to say? Here's some answers.
Okay. Also, I love weather when we have a drought with no storms. It's just sunny, the same old thing. I may feel the grief of disappointment.
Sure.
Because it's like, I used to remember we used to have these rainstorms.
Right.
Santa Ana winds that would just, I mean, I'm kind of like have the mind of like a storm chaser in a sense.
Okay, yeah.
And it's like, when it's just plain, marine layer, sun, and it's just like, it gets boring after, and it's just like I guess with climate change, that stuff is kind of changed.
Right.
And I'm having to accept the fact that there's less of that than there used to be.
Yeah, I think, and I think, and part of what you're talking about with climate change or whatever, to kind of expand it a little bit, that there is that loss there because there's some senses of us and what we're used to, what we expect. And what we want and what makes us feel good. And it's like, well, gee, I'm like you. I was raised in Texas and I love a good thunderstorm, I live in California for many reasons and everything, but that's one of the things that I really miss and all. And I would love to have that. And when you go and go and go, you start feeling it somewhere about something. I mean, is that a grief compared to, the death of a person? But it has similar elements of it, It does, and it's something that we just really want to recognize that and honor it. That's the biggest part about grieving is that we want to give ourselves permission for what we're experiencing and
that's good.
And let it do with us what it needs to do.
Well, I have a really tough one here that I think you'll enjoy. It says, I've never grieved in my life. Does that mean that nothing's important to me? I have aphantasia, no inner eye. Would you say that is a reason for not grieving as I remember no visuals?
I am not sure what aphantasia is, but I would, it's,
They don't visualize, I guess.
yeah, I just think that my guess would be, whoever this may be,
It's someone online, I think.
yeah, my guess would be is that what has been grieving for you has not been recognized as that. But I want to be real careful with that.
So maybe this person doesn't grieve as someone else does, but they still
Yeah.
it's a type of grieving.
Yeah, because
Outside the
again,
box.
that would be a much longer conversation with that person, and that's very interesting because again, personally, I would say I don't think that we can't not grieve. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Can't not grieve.
Yes.
Yeah. But it would be it. But I also know I try to be humble and enough in the sense that there are all kinds of experiences out there, and that God is in the midst of all of them. And so I may say, I don't think that's possible, and kind of this, I don't think that's possible kind of thing. And yet, I very well could be wrong. That's fine.
Well, I believe I know who this person is, and so I would love to another time. I will connect them with you,
Sure.
and that would be great to dialogue. Wonderful person, lots of love and lots of feelings. This is just different.
Yeah.
Any other questions that we have in house, or
Let me
any other stuff?
let me just say something to kind of finish up with that. I got a lot of book knowledge about grief and loss. That's what my doctorate's in. Okay, was thanatology.
Thank you. I was wondering how to say that.
Yeah, thanatology. That's
Okay.
what my doctorate's in, and I have a lot of knowledge with that way and things like that. But my biggest and best teachers are grievers, telling me and teaching me about their experience. I love to hear what people say and do. Talking earlier about that, building that new relationship. And I was talking with one recently. The gentleman is very close to his mother. His mother died at 90 something. And I was talking with him literally about 3 weeks after his mom died. And he said, well, I really think I'm doing pretty well. He said, I called my mom every day. I called my mom every single day. Now I just use a different phone line.
Oh,
I said, I'm going to quote you on that.
Wow.
Because that's exactly what he's talking
That's
about.
amazing.
That's exactly what we're talking about. He still talks to her every day.
So he recognized she was beyond physical. He got it. Mm-hmm. Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I just use a different phone line.
Love that.
It's right here.
Oh my gosh, we're going to hold on to that one, guys. Here's another good question. It's called Pregrief. How do you deal with grieving the loss of a person before they die, like when a person is terminally ill?
Yeah. Yeah. Pre-grief, anticipatory grief, both of them, you start going, all the things I'm going to lose. Debilitating diseases, particularly things like Alzheimer's or the Parkinson's that comes with memory loss and those kinds of things where, you watch this person, change both physically and mentally and things. That's really, really hard because the losses are what we call ambiguous.
Yeah.
And ambiguity is really hard to deal with because it's not black or white like we like. It's not,
Right.
Here's the answer for that. And sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. Grieve it. Recognize that in the midst of that loss and that experience, that, that person maybe didn't recognize you when you first walked in the door, and that's really hard and sends those pangs of grief in there because now is that, are they going to? And then the next time you come back and they are, recognize that they do recognize who you are. Recognize within yourself how painful that was and that is a loss.
Yeah.
Okay. What's going to be? What's it going to be like when this person dies? I don't know how I'm going to go on. Well, a couple of things about that. You can't pre-grieve to make grieving easier. You have to go through it.
Right.
Because while that person is, there is something just categorically different about having that person in this world, whether they're responsive to us or not.
Yeah.
You know, if a person is on life support and we remove that supportive medical stuff from them, and then they die, even before, when they're breathing, however strange it may be, they're still here.
Right.
And when they die, we know that the body is there, but that which animates them is not.
Right.
The spirit or whatever else. And where does that go? You know, we have faith and belief in that. But where is that? What does that look like? How am I going to connect with them now? And it happens like that. It changes within us. We recognize the mystical element and experience that is death. And we don't know what to do with that. And so we have to live our way in it. So one does not preclude the other.
Excellent.
We
Excellent.
have to do both of them.
Excellent question. Here's another one. How do you stop yourself from comparing your grief to someone who lost the same person as you? Example, my pain is bigger.
Yeah, we don't compare griefs. That's the easiest thing. We just say they're all different. Every grief is different. And within our own selves, you know, it's different to lose, to have a spouse die than it is to have a child die, than it is to have a parent die, than it is to have a sibling die.
Right.
You know, you go back to your experiences recently.
Yeah.
Back to what makes up a grief experience, who that person is. We call it kinship. Who that person is to us will make a difference in it. Because again, it is a different experience when a child dies than when a parent or grandparent dies.
Yeah, I think you're right, because there's someone who passed away in my life who, because of their challenges, I was actually relieved on the inside because they're no longer in pain, and then I almost felt guilty for not feeling the grief.
Very
but
common.
I didn't have the grief because I was so thrilled for them finally to
Right.
be at peace.
Right. Very common. And that's a very common kind of thing. And I really want to kind of circle back to the previous question as well, giving ourselves permission. Mm-hmm. Just acknowledge that whatever comes, because to feel relief that somebody dies because now they're out of pain, mm-hmm. or the fact that now their schedule, my schedule, and everything does not revolve around taking care of that person, the doctor's appointments. You know, it's exhausting to be a caregiver. I mean, it is totally exhausting to be a caregiver. And we are finite creatures. That's what God teaches us with Sabbath. We need to rest. And when you're a caregiver, you don't get that. And you can go, oh, God, I'm so glad I don't have to, wipe and get them out of bed and do all of that stuff and clean up the messes and just be aware of what's going on and everything. But I'd do it again. Yeah. To have them here. Acknowledge that both of those are true. Both of those are real. And that they're going to come and go. Rumi the poet says that emotions are like guests who come to our house. He's got a wonderful poem called The Guest House. That these guests come, they knock on the door, they come inside, you invite them in, you listen to what they have to say, you talk with them, understand who they are, because in a little bit they're going to get up and leave. Okay, and that's the way that emotions are, no matter what we are. So I teach people and ask them to say, instead of saying I am angry, saying I'm feeling angry.
Right.
Because if you identify that you are feeling something, you don't become it then, and then it doesn't become a part of your identity.
Wow, that's
all
good.
right.
Right.
That's really powerful. Now back to the anticipatory grief as well. Mm-hmm. Anticipatory grief and oh my God, what am I going to lose, and how that just makes us like this. Now you're living in the future and you're missing the opportunity to be with those people, whatever way that they are in the present now. We as human beings, consciousness is a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing. But it also makes us want to live back there with our regrets and makes us want to live in the future with our anxiety instead of living just right now.
In the moment.
And when you start feeling that way, like, what's it going to be? That should tell you, if you feel anxiety, you're living in the future because you don't know what's there. If you feel regret, you're living in the past. Now, it's not easy to do those things. And sometimes we need to talk to somebody. And sometimes it's just a reminder to ourselves to say, hey, you're not there and you're not there. You're right here. Be here.
Right.
Ground yourself with that. And you bring yourself present. Now you can be with the person, with them, or with whoever it is in that moment. And you relax yourself down.
That's good.
God wants us to be here now. And that's a part of what it means when we, to use the story in that manner, part of what happened when we ate the apple. Now we know the difference in good and evil. We know about time. We understand that stuff. And that is a real burden. It just means that we have to live more now, and we have to work with it now. And we have to work on forgiveness for ourselves, get out of the past, and work to be present so that because we can't control the future.
Well, here's a good one. This person was watching an interview with someone who recently left her marriage. She was with a friend whose husband died, and the friend told her to get up and go on with it since she was the one who left the marriage.
Oh.
She felt that was an encouragement to move on, but the person watching this interview was troubled by that because it seemed to minimize the loss. Can you speak to that type of loss even when you choose to leave?
Sure. Yeah. And again, that goes back to, it may be a good thing. And I'm definitely not one of those that doesn't believe in a divorce. There are bad marriages and things that people need to leave for their own health and humanity. But even do that, there's a lot of loss. And again, oftentimes it's in the field of the secondary losses. This is really true in domestic violence as well, where you need to get out of those situations and stuff. One of the things that you really have to grieve is all the dreams that you had. Those things that were there.
Yeah.
And that's what happens when a child dies,
Yeah.
is the future dies.
Right.
Maybe it's my name if you're in that kind of thing, but it's all the experiences that I was going to have with them. Especially again when it's a young child or something like that. It's all that stuff that was going to be, and why people do remember birthdays and death days and those kinds of things. And they're important to do, and we can and should do those things to a certain extent. We don't want to center our life around it. But what that person did, and what the person who asked the question has experienced, is what's called disenfranchised grief. And this person used the word there. It's a disenfranchised grief where somebody else says, no, that's not a grief. You don't have the right to feel that way, which is really painful. A disenfranchised grief or a disenfranchised loss is a loss where, well, you may think you do, but you don't have the right for that. Which, and again, in a divorce kind of situation, I've heard about folks. I haven't done much with it, admittedly, but where the ex-spouse who did leave, or whatever reason they break up, the ex-spouse dies then, and so the living spouse still has a grief about that because they had a relationship,
right?
And they have to transform that. Well, you divorced them. What do you want? What for? Why are you feeling that way? Because I do.
That's right. Don't
because
judge
it's
it.
a relationship.
Don't judge it, right?
You
Wow.
know?
Wow.
This is something that the LGBTQ plus, with all the other things, and I don't mean make fun of that. I just don't know what all of them are out there anymore. But it's what they feel when a spouse dies or a husband or a wife dies and things. There's a part of society that says, no, you shouldn't have that. Or your partner dies.
Right.
Maybe you've been with somebody for 30 years, but you never got married or whatever. Well,
Right.
you didn't get married. Don't call them your spouse. Yes, they are.
That's right.
In everything but
The paper.
legal kind
Right.
of thing.
Right.
Whatever your grief is, acknowledge it
Right.
and allow other people to do that. Don't judge, because the judgment you use will be used upon you. Okay? And if you end up with a loss, well, I shouldn't feel that way.
Ugh.
I shouldn't feel that way because I sold my car. I sold my house. I had to move across the country. I got a new job and things. I had to leave people behind. Grief comes in any form of attachment that gets broken.
So even in this question, what about the loss of a relationship with someone who is still alive? I'm gathering this person still wants a relationship, but because of the other person, it's not happening.
Yeah.
So
and that's a grief. That's a grief as well. We've called it a broken heart.
Yep.
A romantic broken heart.
Or what if it's a parent? What if it's a parent who is dissing a child?
And those are things that come back to play again in some of those factors that impact a grief. Not all parents are the best parents in the world, right? Let's have Mother's Day and Father's Day, and let's rejoice about that and feel good and stuff, unless your dad beat you, or your mom was an alcoholic who had her own pain and couldn't be there for that. When they die, you've got all those other losses that are a part of that impacts that kind of thing. And again, that can make us feel stuck. A colleague was talking about working with a person whose dad was abusive. And when his dad died, he was really glad the SOB was gone.
That's right.
But he still had to grieve him. And what he had to grieve was not having the father that he was entitled to.
Right.
What we all expect to have.
Right.
Wow. That's what he had to grieve. Wow. So, to kind of go back to this, to this person, aphantasia and all, it may be experienced, but just potentially, I don't know. I would love to talk to him to find out and everything. It may just be something that isn't recognized as what you've experienced or what others have told you is okay to be a grief or something. I don't know.
Yeah, because I would say this person still loves and cares. It's just that side of the coin because of how they've been diagnosed.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I mean, it's part of what makes narcissistic people so difficult.
Well, this person
does.
isn't that. I'm just
no,
saying.
No, and I don't mean that.
I know who you are. You're not.
Mean that. I'm sorry. I was going to go on and I didn't finish.
Go ahead.
My apologies. But we all know about narcissistic people and everything,
right.
And it's like they just trample on folks, right. And it's like, don't you have a heart and stuff? There's a capacity within them that's missing. They are they have an issue within them, and sometimes there are things like this that do impact a person's experience. But it doesn't mean, I would say, it doesn't mean that you don't grieve. It just means that you have a different experience of that is not maybe socially defined that way.
There's always outside the box things people don't
understand.
I
apologize. I'm really wanting to draw the difference with that and things. So,
just two more things. I know we're going to close, but one is we had talked and you mentioned about, I think it's worth repeating about Job's friends, because I said, what is one of the things that you could do to help someone who's grieving, what to say, what to do? And why don't you share that? It was really good.
Yeah, we were talking about that, and we're in grief, we turn to Job an awful lot and everything because he's lost all this stuff and everything. And I said, Job's friends did a wonderful job for the first 7 days. They came in, they sat on the ash heap with him, they tore their clothes, they did all the mourning things, tearing the clothes, sitting in the ash heap, throwing ashes on you, fasting, that kind of stuff. Those are mourning rituals within that. They did all the right stuff. Then they tried to start making sense of his loss, which we all do. And that's part of what grief does for us. That's back to that spirituality kind of things that will change stuff. Well, what happened? Well, God gives and God takes away. We don't know. And God has a plan and all the other moralistic stuff that we've been taught that makes sense to us because it's not our loss. And we want to go in and we want to fix somebody in grief. I want you to feel better so that I know how to deal with you.
Because your grief makes me uncomfortable.
Because your grief makes me uncomfortable because when I look at you, I recognize that, me and my people are going to die too. And I don't like that. So let me fix this for you. And you can't fix grief. There's only one thing that does, and that's having that person back. And death said no. Which is why, and that's a whole nother time. I won't even start there.
I'll have you another time.
Yeah, that's a whole nother thing. But so we have to make sense of it. And Job's friends started doing that. And they should have kept their mouth shut, because you cannot make sense of someone's loss for them. They have to discover that.
That's true. So true.
You know, asking them questions, being with them. Yeah, you know, Karen, I can hear, and I've heard a couple of times here where you've started to talk and your voice kind of went like this a little bit, and you are marvelous at holding that together, allowing yourself to breathe and letting that and everything. But had you cried and let it out in whatever manner and everything, to just sit and be here with you is what we would have done. Because we can't bring your brother back. We can't bring your house back. We can't bring your car back.
I know. She's not auctioned yet, probably either. So, oh well. I keep seeing it, and I feel bad for her.
But the reality is that all of those, one after another, they're intermingling. And to say to you, Karen, those are deep losses, and that's a lot to try to pull yourself through, and to try to get up every day and to meet the needs of the day, because you still have a life.
Right. Yep.
That's really hard to do. And frankly, Karen, the fact that you're this far down the line, you're doing a good job. You really are. And you need to give yourself some credit for that. I can't give that to you. But you need to honor yourself with the energy you're putting out, and the work that you're doing, and the wisdom that you have to step back from time to time and give yourself the wisdom to go walk in the mountains. You felt better with that. Somehow there was something that said to you, you need to get out there. And you walked out there and you came back and you were a little more able to do things. You had more energy, you had more space, you processed whatever the pain was of that day, whatever the memories were of that, you processed by getting outside, seeing nature, and living life now. And that was beautiful work. What I would encourage you to do is to do that a little more often. Giving yourself the permission to take care of yourself so that you can do this hard work of grieving. But you're doing a good job.
Thank you. I receive that, and I will do that. So I will be on my bike trail, because I can't explain how it rejuvenates me from the inside out. I feel one with God. I feel connected to the birds and the butterflies and the lizards and the people and the doggies. And it doesn't take the place of anything, but it just feels right.
And that's your heart. And our heart primarily leads us in grief. We just sort of know what we need to do. We sort of figure it out. And next year, when your brother's, birthday or the anniversary
They're
of his
close
death
to each
comes
other.
around,
Yeah.
and everything, you will go, oh my God, what am I going to do? And somehow you'll figure it out. You'll figure out what feels right. And that's what we do in the holidays, as it's coming up right now. We didn't talk about much. I rumbled the field and stuff like that.
Thank you.
But, sit down and talk. You, John, everybody together. What are we going to do on Thanksgiving? How do we recognize that he's not here? How do we honor that? And you'll figure it out. And you'll figure it out. And you'll feel pain. You'll probably shed some tears, and that's okay. But you give yourself the permission to do what feels right, and that'll make a difference.
Thank you. On the heels of that, if you can look in the camera now, and what would you say to everyone who's grieving now? Prayer, wisdom, counsel, anything as we close.
I just, again, would reiterate that in that sense of giving yourself permission to feel what you feel, to do what you need to do, to experience what comes along, and to trust that God is in that with you, and that God leads you in that and walks with you in that. And if you're feeling stuck or don't feel like things are progressing, reach out and find some help. Find what you need. A bereavement group, maybe it's a book to read about, somebody else's experience. Maybe it's a therapist, but some kind of support for yourself, because the primary way that we do our grief in this world and do it well is having others around us, because that's who we are. It is not good, God said, for the creature to be alone. So let's do this together. Let's listen to our heart and listen to one another and support ourselves through this long journey of grief that we have.
I want to thank you guys for joining us online. This is different, but I'm just feeling like as a church we got to tackle the everyday things and start talking about the tough things like Mitson and I did with mental health before. Mm-hmm. And now I feel this is important. And yes, I am the guinea pig as I've gone through it, but I want it to be vulnerable with you. And I know during the holidays we all feel it. So receive those words. He said, I receive them. And I want to thank you again. Thank you so much. Wait.
You're welcome.
And until we meet again, bye-bye, guys. Hi, I'm Pastor Karen of Oasis of the Valley, and I'm here with Pastor Christine and Dr. John, and we'd like to share something with you. If you don't live in the local area and you'd like to be part of our Oasis Fellowship, we've got a way to connect.
We'd like to get to know you personally by video conference calls and telephone calls, and Dr. John will tell you more about how that came about.
It was just a few weeks ago. In literally 1 week's time, I got several emails from people in different parts of the United States and even overseas who are interested in finding a church in their area that's preaching the same powerful message that we are, and in the way we are, that's quite unique. And unfortunately, I couldn't give them really an answer. I know of a couple of churches and friends that are ministering like this, but honest, there's not too many. And we are truly trying to press forward into a whole new arena in God right now. And what wound up happening was that the thought occurred to me, well, we've got all this amazing technology. Why can't we pastor them with the video conferencing and stuff that you were talking about and minister into their life? And who knows what God will be able to do through that. With enough people, maybe be able to start a church out there.
Sounds good. So if you're interested, please click the link below and we'll explain more.